Welcome to Just One Thing for Parents. I'm Bettina Honan. Today I was joined by Dr. Jon Goldin, who is a child and adolescent psychiatrist who's worked in the NHS for many years and now in private practice in the field of mental health, child mental health, and neurodisability, neurodiversity. We talked about the importance of setting boundaries for parents. Now, setting boundaries isn't just about being strict and controlling, it's actually about creating a loving, predictable environment where children can actually grow and thrive. But implementing boundaries can be really challenging. And Jon talks about why it's challenging in today's world. We talk about some of the patterns that parents can get caught in, how kids can kind of split parents, and what we can do about that. And he has lots of really great advice, including just that we need to stick to it, consistency, and a real belief that boundaries can help your children grow into adults who are able to function well in society and feel psychologically safe, is at the heart of his message. So please have a listen to my interview with Dr. Jon Goldin. Hello and welcome, Jon. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me, Bettina.
So the question for you is, how do boundaries help children thrive, and why do parents find them hard? And maybe I could ask you just to start by saying a little bit about why you chose this as your question.
Sure. Okay. I mean, as a child and adolescent psychiatrist, I often find myself talking about boundaries with parents, and as a parent, I also find myself thinking about boundaries quite a bit as well. I think it's really important in terms of promoting healthy physical and emotional development in young people. I think boundaries is an issue that a lot of people find quite difficult. I know that I found it difficult as a parent, still do sometimes. Uh, my daughters are no longer children; they're young adults at
Mm,
university. I think particularly parents of teenagers can find boundaries challenging.
yeah,
Uh, Teenagers kind of learn by pushing the boundaries and challenging the boundaries and coming up against them. I'm sure we'll talk about that in more detail as we go along.
yeah.
But I do think boundaries is a very important issue in terms of, helping young people learn about what it is to sort of function as happy, healthy members of our society and having good relationships. I think healthy boundaries kind of provide structure, they sort of promote responsibility. They help young people learn about things like self-discipline and respect for others.
Mm,
So I just think it's a very important issue. And when you asked me about, what I might like to talk about, that was one of the things that I thought about that you thought would be a good thing to explore.
yeah, amazing. Thank you. So, I suppose that there's a two-part to the question. Yeah, I mean, you've said a bit there about how they do help children thrive. I don't know if there's more there, but also it's I think what you say is it is really hard for parents, particularly for teenagers, and teenagers are driven to push up against parents and try and find their own way of thinking. Maybe, maybe they have different views to parents.
Yeah,
That can be
absolutely.
really hard.
I mean, I often talk to parents that I work with about boundaries with teenagers as being a bit like rubber tires. In fact, Robin Anderson, I don't know if you've come across him. He's quite
No.
old now, but he's a former psychoanalyst and child and adolescent psychiatrist at Great Ormond, sorry, at the Tavistock. And he spoke to me when I was training about boundaries with adolescents being a bit like tires,
Mm,
quite solid, but also giving something. So
nice.
they're not like kind of glass that you can't smash against and everything's shattered, but
Yeah.
they're also not like elastic that just stretches ad infinitum without kind of being there. But a tire is kind of safe to kick against, isn't it? It's there, it's solid, but it's also gives a little bit. So I think that's quite a nice way of thinking about boundaries with teenagers. And they will question the boundaries, they will challenge them, and that's all
Mm,
healthy stuff about sort of separation and individuation and
mm.
and asserting themselves. But they also really need those boundaries. I think we both have worked with young people where there've been very few boundaries, and that's really problematic
Yeah.
for many kind of obvious reasons.
It
Um,
actually can make young people feel safe. Sometimes I think that's quite a helpful reframe for parents, isn't it? To say that actually, if they don't have boundaries there, there's an unsafety of that. Like, oh God, I'm in charge. Like, how do I know what I should and shouldn't be doing? They
yeah,
won't vocalize that, but that is what they feel. So just as much as you have to help them emotionally, you also have to help them in terms of boundaries, in terms of fundamental psychological safety.
absolutely,
Agree.
absolutely. And I do often find myself talking about that as well, that children not only need them, but they kind of value them. They
Yeah.
might not say, please give me a boundary, mum or dad,
Yeah.
but they feel safer, they feel more secure, they feel more kind of contained if they know where the boundaries are, because they might have, angry feelings, aggressive feelings, sexual feelings and thoughts, and when they know what the parameters are, what the boundaries are, I think that really helps them feel more secure. I
Yeah.
mean, we know about, insecure and secure attachment. I think when things are very unpredictable and uncertain and the boundaries aren't really there, that promotes less secure kind of attachment patterns for young people.
Yeah.
Whereas if the consistency is there, um, I think that really helps people feel more secure, in their relationships and also kind of in their place in the world. I
Yeah.
mean, a common thing actually is that parents have different boundaries or different views about boundaries.
Yeah.
That's maybe worth thinking about a little bit,
Yeah.
because smart children are very able to sort of split their parents and say, "Oh, well, dad said I could do that," or "Mum said I could do that." And
Yeah.
and obviously there's lots of families where there are single parent families, so that might be less of an issue. But I think it's important for parents to sort of try and work together, and where they have differences of emphases, which inevitably they will do because they were raised in different families and they've got different personalities and different backgrounds, that they try and come to a sort of joint view about what they're going to say to their teenager or their child about
Yes.
things like, what time do I expect you home? Or if you're going to be home at a later time from a party than you said you would, make sure you let us know. Those
Mm.
kind of things.
Mm.
What is and what isn't acceptable will vary between individuals and families, and each family, each parent has to work it out for themselves.
Mm.
But I think that consistency and predictability is really important and valuable.
Yeah. Sometimes what I'll see is that parents will kind of almost be either side of a kind of pendulum that swings. And when one is kind of kind and empathetic, the other one looks at them and go, "Wow, you're being really weak." And they start becoming strong, but then strong becomes a bit mean. And then the
Mm.
kind one becomes a bit weaker, and then they get off balance. So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
can play out in front of a child again and again and again.
It absolutely can. It absolutely can. And also when parents have separated or got divorced, obviously that's accentuates that kind of feeling of, well,
Yeah.
dad's mum said, and then it's harder sometimes to communicate. So I think in families where that has happened, I think it's important for the parents still to think about them as co-parenting the children, if possible. Obviously, sometimes
Yeah.
a lot of acrimony and history to the whole relationship. But if possible, even though the relationship's broken down in terms of a married couple or a couple, if they can co-parent in a helpful way, I think that's really important. And boundaries is obviously part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So why is this so hard for parents?
I think it's hard. I think partly some parents feel like, oh my God, I give up, I can't do it. My
Yeah.
teenager's too challenging. There's too many pressures on them, from peers. You might think you should really be back by midnight, but they're telling me all their peers are back by 2 a.m. or
Yeah.
whatever. And I think social media and technology comes into it as well. I think, that's an area where boundaries is really important, but a lot of parents kind of throw up their hand and say, I don't understand it. My teenager knows more about it than I do. They're
Yes.
telling me that their peers are allowed to do this, therefore I'm too restrictive. And, if I try and impose some kind of boundary like no phones in the bedroom at night, that kind of thing. So I think, parents can sometimes feel a bit kind of de-skilled by the changes, generational changes, things like that. I think, we're not living in days where, it's a long time ago that children were seen and not heard, Victorian
Mm.
days. But, views of childhood and young people have kind of developed, haven't they? I
Yeah.
mean, you do often hear adults saying, well, when I was a child, I didn't answer back, or,
Mm.
I just, what my dad said or what my mum said was just, went. I mean, I'm not sure it was always quite that simple, actually. Sometimes
Yeah.
they pattern things in a little bit of a inaccurate way with memories and things. But I do think, yeah, people feel a bit de-skilled, and I think, conversations like this are important in that. I think, we've both been parents, our parents, and I think it's important that we, talk about it, reflect about it, that parents talk to each other. For
Yeah.
example, the idea that, my friend is allowed to use his phone and game all evening. Why don't you allow me? If parents are talking to each other about it, they
Yeah.
actually realize that's not quite the case.
Yeah.
Similarly, like in schools, I mean, most schools nowadays, certainly most junior schools, you're not allowed to take a smartphone in.
Hmm.
during the school hours, and
Yeah.
that sort of helps the parents because it's more of a kind of communal rule and an appropriate boundary. Similarly, most secondary schools, actually, I think over 90% of secondary schools, you don't actually use a phone during the school day.
God, that's such a great change.
Yeah, that is changing, and politically, it's quite an
Mm.
issue at the moment. People are
Yeah,
talking about it more, and should they actually be banned in schools?
yeah,
Many head teachers are being very sensible about it and actually managing that without, needing to be a kind of national ban.
yeah.
Um, so I think when there's, those sort of social boundaries, they can be really important as well. And of
Mm.
course, the police, the law,
Yeah.
teachers, they're all kind of imposing boundaries or, appropriate boundaries to make
Mm.
society function.
Mm.
So parents, it's not easy being a parent, but they can get help from, talking to other parents and
Yeah.
sharing the dilemmas and thinking about it in the way that we're thinking about it today.
Yeah. I would say to parents, try and work out what you think when your child isn't in front of you. Because when you're faced by your child's emotion, strong emotion, or they're trying to say to you, you're just the worst parent, you're such a mean parent, it's really hard to stick with what you really believe. But if you've had that conversation with somebody else, with whoever you're co-parenting with, or your friend or something, and said, this is what I really believe,
Mm,
then that really helps, doesn't it, to stay grounded in the face of their emotion? Because that's the other thing I can think can knock parents off is the strength of their child's emotion, anger or sadness, or
mm.
uh, that's very scary for parents.
Absolutely. And I think talking about emotional boundaries is an important thing to do with your child, your teenager. It's okay to be angry, it's okay to cry and
Mm.
be sad, it's okay to express those things, but
Mm.
it's not okay, for example, to hit someone.
Yeah,
How do you express your anger? You
yeah.
might want to shout. Sometimes you might want to go into your bedroom, and I sometimes advise my patients, to hit the mattress or a pillow, or if they want to, or a punch bag, or go and do some sport, or go for a walk, or
Hmm.
out and take some deep breaths. There's different ways of managing it, but it's
Mm.
okay to be angry and it's
Yeah.
okay to be sad. And children and teenagers get all sorts of silent messages from their parents as well. If a parent
Yes.
thinks it's not okay ever to cry or ever to be sad, then the child will sort of pick up that message, and they might not find it easy to cry in front of their parents if that's never happened the other way around.
Yeah.
So I think, how you communicate about boundaries is also really important. So children are always looking at you as a role model one way or another.
Mm.
So if you sort of say to them, I've told you to not effing swear or whatever, obviously that's not a great example of how to do it. That's a silly example maybe, but you know what I mean.
No, absolutely.
No, I've told you not to ever get angry and
Yeah.
stuff as you're yelling at them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how you do it, it's okay, by the way, to shout sometimes. I've shouted as a parent. I'm sure you have. We all have.
Yeah.
It's I think it's important that parents kind of forgive themselves if they, do lose their cool sometimes.
Yeah.
It's not okay, obviously, to hit children or for children to hit adults, all those kind of things. There need to be some very firm boundaries.
Mm.
And we both, I'm sure, work with young people sometimes where those boundaries are really, really challenged.
Yeah.
Um, but how you communicate about boundaries is kind of as important as what the boundaries are, what the rules
Yeah.
are. So I think you need to communicate with respect and empathy. And I often say, let's try and see the world through our child's eyes.
Mm.
If you say to your child, you just should be off social media all the time, they're going to become a little bit of a social pariah.
Yeah.
It's just part of their life to communicate,
Yeah.
Instagram and Snapchat and things. So, I wouldn't recommend that as an approach, but I would recommend that we think about, how many hours a day, putting the phone, as I mentioned earlier, in the kitchen to charge overnight, and but the
Mm.
parents modeling that as well, so that
Yeah.
the phone isn't kind of on the bedside table all night and potentially pinging at 2 in the morning with a message that's going to upset the young person. So, and sleep is really important as well. So there's boundaries around sleep is another thing. For younger children, I mean, we spent quite a lot of time talking about teenagers, but for younger children, getting into a good sleep routine, having a good routine around bedtime, that's really helps promote healthy development. If it's a regular bedtime, you have a bath before bedtime, maybe you read a story, whatever it is, every family will be a bit different, but that
Mm.
structure, routine, predictability, consistency, really kind of the young person internalizes something about that.
Yeah.
And then it affects how they develop as a human being, really,
Yeah.
to feel sort of safer in the world and to be probably a more responsible adult by the time they get their boundaries are so kind of crucial to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I always think, if you think about that moment of when you say no to your child, there are going to be moments where they feel furious with you, where they
Mm,
feel really angry. And I think we talk so much, don't we, at the moment in our profession about having strong relationships. And I
yeah.
suppose it's reminding people that strong relationships doesn't mean that there's never conflict. It doesn't mean that you're not, your child doesn't feel angry with you. They can feel angry with you, and you can say, "You're just so furious with me last night, right
Mm,
now, because
mm,
I've said no to that party, and I can see how furious you are." And they say, "I hate you," and they don't hate you. They're
no,
just cross with you, and it's okay.
yeah.
And it's not going to ruin your relationship if they don't feel happy or they feel cross with you for those moments.
Yeah, I mean, a parent's job is not to be their teenager's best friend necessarily. It's to be their
Yeah,
parent. So,
yeah,
and I think I found that difficult sometimes as a parent as well.
me
I think we all,
too.
it's not easy for someone to be angry with you. You don't want the person you love most in the world, and one of the people
Mm,
in the world, to be angry and cross with you and tell you what a, awful dad or mum you are.
yeah,
But at the same time, it's really part of the job of being a parent to take that anger from your teenager or your child sometimes and still be there for them and for them to realize that they can be angry with you and tell you that they hate you, but
yeah,
you're still going to love them. It's
yeah,
unconditional.
yeah,
There are certain things, as I said earlier, that are just not okay. But even if they do hit you on occasion, when they've really lost their cool, it doesn't mean you're going to stop loving them and that's it. You're out on the doorstep kind of thing.
yeah,
You still stay there for them, you still support them. And
mhm.
I often say that, children who are behaving badly or being aggressive or angry or whatever, they're often having a difficult time.
Yes,
And I think that's really important to remember.
I
It's
agree.
not that they're just nasty children. They're
No,
they're struggling with something.
yeah,
So I think parents need to sort of keep that in mind too.
yeah. Oh, it's so helpful. Thank you so much. If there was just one thing, because the podcast is called Just One Thing, and I know we always talk about so many more than just one, but if there
Yeah.
was just one thing that you could say to parents about boundaries and what to remember, what
Yeah.
would that be?
Well, don't be afraid of setting boundaries. Boundaries are really important. Try and make them, consistent and fair. But by, applying boundaries to your child as they're developing, you are helping them develop into a healthy young
Yeah,
adult
yeah,
who will be happy and secure because they've been raised by parents who know about appropriate boundaries. But also be kind to yourself. You won't get it right all the time.
yeah,
There are times when you kind of mess up or you do shout when you're cross or whatever, and that's fine. It's not easy.
yeah, yeah,
But don't give up on it and keep working on it, and that will help your child develop and thrive.
yeah. Amazing. Oh, John, thank you so much for your time today. It was such a great podcast.
Really, real pleasure, Bettina. Thank you for inviting me.